Okay, so here we are, Bible and Daily Lifers. We are going through the Bible, the whole Bible in a year, and we are up to now the book of Judges. And so what does that mean? It means that we have gone through the first 5 books, which we call the Pentateuch, the law of Moses, the Torah, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And we have started what is known as the 12 history books. And we started with the book of Judges, which we went through. We started with the book of Joshua, which we went through. And now we're in the book of Judges. So let's go through the whole history. And by the time we get to the end of the Old Testament, you're going to be so bored with going through the whole history. Well, you're going to be able to recite it yourself. You'll be able to say it on a dime. So it starts with Genesis 1:1, where it says, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." And we saw there that right there we had some of the big beginnings. We had God, Elohim, God plural, which we later will learn that that's the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. We learn that He created everything. We learn that there's a Trinity there. We see that the laws of physics are there, the way that we understand it today. And then we jump to verse 126, and we saw that it was there that God had created people, and He created them in His image. Now, it doesn't mean that all of the attributes of God belong to you and belong to me. There's things about God that you don't have, but there are many things that we are made in His image. We have the capacity to love. We have the capacity to create. We have the capacity to do a lot of things made in God's image. Now, we're not sovereign. We don't know everything, but we are made in His image. And so we saw that, and it gives us value, and that's the basis of all human rights. It's right there in Genesis 1:26. It doesn't take us long. We see the beginning of marriage. We see the beginning of everything in Genesis, the beginning of human beings, the beginning of marriage. We see the beginning of the fall. We see the rebellion of people turning against God in chapter 3. And there's where all the trouble begins, where they turn away from God, and then there are consequences for them, and there's consequences for all of the creation. The creation itself is cursed by God. And boy, that's created a mess, and now we're in that mess. So we move forward in the book of Genesis. We saw Noah, and we looked at Noah, and we get to chapter 12, which is the key hinge of the whole Old Testament. That's where we meet Abraham. And God makes these promises. We counted 7 of them. That his name would be great. His name is great. That his descendants would be like the stars of the sea and the sand of the sand of the sea and the stars of the sky, which we do in fact know happen. They're innumerable. There's just so many of them. And so that happened. And then we saw that through his family tree, that guy Abraham, who would also have the land, that through him the Messiah was going to come. And so all through the scriptures, we're going to be looking for the Messiah, and we're going to be seeing the Messiah come through Abraham's family tree. So we saw that Abraham had some sons, had a couple of sons, Isaac, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And of course, he had Ishmael. And then they have kids, and they become known as the 12 tribes of Israel. They go down into Egypt, and there they stay for 400 years. They become slaves, and they come out with a mighty hand. Moses leads them out. So when Moses leads them out, that brought us into the book of Exodus. And in the book of Exodus, that's where we saw that they now begin this new life of freedom away from Pharaoh. He brings them to Mount Sinai. And at Mount Sinai, that's where they get the commandments. We looked at the tabernacle that he built and saw that that was a representation of Jesus, and it was also a representation of the Christian life and experience. So it brings us up to Exodus. And then we got to this other book, Leviticus, which was just a bloody book. It was all about sacrifices. And we saw how all of those sacrifices were pointing to the coming sacrifice, the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, the Lamb of Lamb, and the sacrifice of sacrifice. We saw how that would happen to him. Jesus being the ultimate sacrifice. So that was in the book of Leviticus. And then we got into the book of Numbers. Now, the book of Numbers was all about what? Numbers. There was a census in the beginning. There was a census in the end. And there were 3 major places that they had stopped and some journeys in between. And this journey that it said 11 days, so a couple of weeks, could have taken them a couple of weeks, they could have gotten there. It takes them 40 years of wandering around in the wilderness. And there, those who came out of Egypt essentially die in the wilderness. And so that brings us up to the book of Deuteronomy. And in the book of Deuteronomy, that's the second law, where the whole generation that has now passed is a new generation, and they're going into the land to take the land. Well, are they going into the land? Really, they're going back to the land, because that was the land that had been promised to Abraham. And so they're just simply going back to it. They're going back to the place that God had told them that they would have, that he had promised to Abraham. So Deuteronomy, the second law, we see it all over again. We see that he reiterates to them the blessings and the promises, what he will do if they obey, what will happen if they disobey, and tells it to them. So that's the book of Deuteronomy. Then we got to the book of Joshua. And Joshua is really kind of that lone survivor, isn't he? That he's the one who had gone in before and had seen the land, and he said, let's go do it, and the others didn't want to do it. Well, now he's Moses' successor, because Moses, the author of the first 5 books, he's dead, he's gone. And we also saw that nobody knows what happened to his body. And later on in Jude, it says that Michael the archangel and Satan were fighting over the body of Moses. So Joshua was going into the land, and Joshua becomes known as the one who does the conquest. He's taking the land. He's taking the land of Canaan. And sure enough, they go in there and they take it, and it gets divided up, starts to get divided up into the 12 tribes. Joshua leading them, brings us all the way to the end of the book, and Joshua's dying. Now we're into the book of Judges. So the book of Judges is sort of interesting. It's going to take about 350, 400 years. And the book of Judges, the judges are not judges as we would think of judges. We think of judges as you go into a courtroom and you're going to have a hearing and the judge is going to listen to evidence. And they're not that at all. These judges are people that rule at times of crisis. There will be a whole cycle that happens in the book of Judges. And the crisis will be that the people rebel against God. There are consequences. God raises up a leader, and then they're restored. And this will happen time after time after time. And he will often do this through what's called a judge. Again, a judge isn't some kind of official judge as we would think of a judge. They're just interim leaders. Sometimes they're military leaders. Sometimes they're just maybe local, maybe a region leader. But God raises them up, and they get rid of the enemies. And once again, they're starting to prosper, and they do well. And no sooner do they start to prosper and do well than what happens is they do it again. They fall away from God all over again. He raises up a judge, one of these people. He frees them from what's going on, and then period of prosperity, and then what happens? Same. The book of Judges will end by saying this. This will be like the last line in it. It says they had no king, and everybody did whatever was right in their own sight. So we're going to do an overview of the book of Judges, and then we're going to look at a few of those judges. There are some names that you might be familiar with. That you hear these names. You hear the name of Gideon. You hear the name of Samson. You hear the name of Deborah. Well, we're going to go over all of those and take a look at them and see what happened while they were judging. We'll look at those stories. So that brings us all the way up from Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, book of Joshua, book of Judges. And so we're moving right along and making some progress, and it's going to be a blast going through the book of Judges, and then we'll continue. We're starting to move pretty good now, starting to get that overview of everything that's happening in the Bible. So bless you guys. Love you. Talk to you soon. Peace.